Welcome into the Vandy Sports Podcast on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, alongside Joey Dwyer. We're coming to you on a Sunday evening, December the 17th. Happy holidays and getting set for Christmas. Things are slowing down somewhat, Joey, but right as I say that, we've got some football news to get into. We've got a few portal pickups for Vandy. Of course, there won't be any basketball. It's going to be a football episode today because there's a lot to get to. We've got a quarterback in town. We've got an offensive coordinator, as reported by Pete Thamel, in town. I mean, I don't know if he's literally in town, but I would guess both of them will be in town here shortly. A few other pickups to get into. We got signing day on Wednesday, so a lot going on. And Joey, we got a guest coming up as well that you booked. So give credit to you there. Tell everybody about this guest we got coming on a little bit later.
Yeah, it's the publisher of the Utah Rival site. I think that's a pretty fitting addition to the podcast today. Nate Johnson committing to Vanderbilt out of the portal. Alex Markham from the Utah Rival site, their publisher, friend of Chris, will be on the show today. So we'll talk to him, but I think we start with Nate Johnson, Vanderbilt's newest quarterback addition, and probably its starter in 2024, a guy who can really run it. I said, I think that's a guy who can really fit what Tim Beck's trying to do with Vanderbilt's offense, and I think it adds a dimension to Vanderbilt's offense that I didn't necessarily have for a lot of the 2023 season, and a dimension I kind of tried to force by putting Walter Taylor in the game against Ole Miss. And later on in the season, now it has that in its starting quarterback, and it has a guy who can zip it a little bit, can make some intermediate throws, a guy who was an Elite 11 guy as a high schooler, so there is some upside here. I don't know that it's fully tapped into yet, and we'll see how much Vanderbilt can develop him, but feels like an exciting addition that finally kind of embraces the offensive identity that I think we've been calling for Vanderbilt to have for a long time, with a dual threat quarterback that can kind of make up for some deficiencies elsewhere on the offensive line. And in terms of the receivers they have in the running game, feels like him and Tim Beck kind of go hand in hand, with Tim Beck wanting to have a mobile quarterback. We'll see if Johnson can become a dual threat guy that can really help him. But the upside here is something that I'm pretty excited about if I'm Vanderbilt.
No doubt, and it's kind of an interesting story for Nate Johnson. He spent 2 years at Utah, played in 4 games as a freshman, and Utah had a revolving door at quarterback last year. He played in 7 games. He finished 39 of 72 for 499 yards and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also had 235 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns on 59 carries. A lot of carries for a quarterback. Of course, he's joining a Vanderbilt team that went 2-10 this year, 0-8 in the SEC. They lost Swan, Seals, Walter Taylor. It looks like Taylor's going to go to, or it already is at Colorado. It looks like Swan might land at South Carolina. We'll see where Ken Seals goes. Obviously, Nate Johnson leaves a program that had a revolving door at quarterback, and he comes to a program that had a revolving door at quarterback last year. But I think the biggest thing here, Joey, is that he is the guy. I mean, I don't think, if you're Nate Johnson, I don't know that you commit to Vanderbilt, without believing in your mind, at least, that you're the guy. And, obviously in the NIL era, I would assume, he'll be making some decent money, of course, as an elite athlete. I mean, he ran a 10-3 100-meter dash. I mean, that's faster than London Humphreys. We talked a lot about London Humphreys' speed. Humphreys was a 10-6 guy. And Nate Johnson's a quarterback. And we talked on the phone here before we recorded, and we were talking about Johnson. And I brought up the fact that, Utah and their staff basically said, hey, we don't see you as a quarterback. You can play receiver for us, but, we got Cam Rising coming back. We don't really see you as a quarterback. I'll be interested to see what our guest has to say about that, of course, too. But it's just interesting. I think he'll be hungry, Joey. He'll be ready to prove himself after a year. Of course, he didn't set the world on fire with his numbers, but I think he fits well in this Tim Beck heavy run scheme, as you mentioned. It's kind of interesting looking back last year at what Tim Beck, and we'll get into Beck, of course, more, but it's interesting to look at what Beck did last year with Diego Pavia. This past season, Pavia is a guy. He's like 5'9", $190. He's not the biggest guy, but he's athletic, and he can make the right throws within that scheme. I think that's what you're looking at if you're Vanderbilt with Nate Johnson. And I know you posted some of his highlights. That's elite speed, Joey. And it's almost like I saw somebody tweet and bring up Mike Wright, Vanderbilt. Well, that's an interesting route to bring in Mike Wright again. But I think he's not a dynamic thrower, and I need to watch more film. I probably can't fairly evaluate him. But from what I've seen, he's not inept throwing the football. He made some decent throws of the throws I saw. Of course, we're going to probably dive more into the film, but I think that's an interesting aspect, Joey. I guess you could say he's a Mike Wright, but adds that element of throwing the football, moving the ball down the field. And as I said, we'll get into more of his film, but I just think it's an interesting fit with Beck, and obviously all we've heard from Beck so far. We got to study more up on him, but all we've heard from Beck so far and about his scheme is that he likes to run his quarterback, likes to run the football in general. So I look at that, Joe, and I say that's a good fit. Now, again, there's still so much to happen. I think they still need a couple of receivers in here. I know they picked up Fortenberry, commit there at tight end. I guess as a primary blocking tight end, you will get Cole Spence back next year healthy. Cam Johnson, of course. Yeah. You got to get a couple of receivers. You've got speed coming in with Nate Johnson. Now you got to build around him. I'm hearing some good things about a couple of O-linemen potentially coming into Vanderbilt, and so they got to build around him now, Joey. Right? Feel like you've got your guy. I mean, am I wrong in that saying Nate Johnson's their guy?
Yeah, I think the Utah staff wasn't really sold on Nate Johnson as a quarterback long term, but I'll tell you who is sold on Nate Johnson as a quarterback long term, Nate Johnson. And I think we've seen that publicly, we've seen that in pressers. I think you'd love to see that from him, just see the confidence that he has in himself. And it feels like that may propel him to being a guy and taking a step forward. I felt like from the tune of things I heard, he became more and more comfortable as a passer throughout the season this year. What I look at is a peripheral number that I like, 72 pass attempts this year and no interceptions. And obviously, there were some things that were dumbed down for him. There was a lot of screens and some play action where he was rolling out and didn't have as many reads. But I think he can really push it down the field a little bit. I think he has a strong arm, and I think there's obviously room to go there. But there are some things that lead me to believe that he could be a guy who could be a foundational piece for Vanderbilt at quarterback moving forward. He has 3 years of eligibility, so even if it doesn't fully click this year, and even if he has a little trouble, he has a few years where Vanderbilt could maybe develop him, and I think that's something that you look at positively. But really what I look at is just the fit, and regardless of what people say about his throwing ability or whatever, I think he could be kind of the guy that Tim Beck was hoping for when he got the job, the guy who can run it. I think he's a guy who can make people miss in the open field, and I think he's a guy who can really execute what Vanderbilt wants to do and can kind of make up for deficiencies elsewhere, like we mentioned earlier, in terms of the offensive line, the running game, perhaps at receiver. So it feels like Vanderbilt can maybe take a step forward with him at quarterback just because of how good of a fit he is in Tim Beck's system. Feels like he can really run what Beck wants him to run. And I think we've talked about for a long time that it's a hard place to play quarterback. It's more and more difficult if you can't run it. I think that gives him a leg up, and I think that is what Vanderbilt fans should be excited about, is just the way that he's able to kind of add another dimension to this offense and can mask some of those things. But like we said all along, you have to be able to complement him in some way, and I think that's probably my biggest question with Vanderbilt right now is, can it complement it with better O-line play, with a running game of any sort outside of him, and with some receivers?
So obviously, Joey, he's got speed, right? We've seen a little bit of his throwing ability. That's probably the bigger question. But I think it's interesting. For Utah, he was more of a change of pace guy, right? They kind of switched back and forth from Bryson Barnes and Nate Johnson when Rising went out. So it'll be interesting. Obviously, let's say he's the guy, right? Say he starts the season as the starter and Vanderbilt sort of builds around him and his skill set within that scheme. Okay, he's the guy. What kind of quarterback do you bring in? Are you bringing in another quarterback just like him, to back him up? Or do you bring in a quarterback to sort of complement him that has a strong arm and is more of a kind of a sit in the pocket type guy? I think there's still some big decisions out there to be made by Vanderbilt. But if they do bring in a running quarterback right there behind Johnson, okay, you've got a little bit of a younger guy right there to sort of develop maybe behind Johnson. I know you still got a couple of those freshmen coming in, Hilaire and Muschamp, Drew Dickey, of course, also on the roster. But that's going to be interesting about this, right? If in their mind, if they think Nate Johnson's the guy, say he goes down, do you have a guy right behind him that is similar to Nate Johnson, as a mobile quarterback and can do the same things? That's, there's still pieces in that quarterback room to to kind of sort through, but you've got that piece in Nate Johnson, and I think with where Vanderbilt's at, he is a high ceiling type guy right now. He's a guy that can take you, I think, from 2 wins to, I mean, at least 4, right? I think he is a guy that can go out and win you some games, especially against some of those non-conference teams, whether it's Virginia Tech, at Georgia State. Obviously, they got some tougher non-conference games there, and then maybe some of the lesser SEC teams. But that's what I look at, Joey. And in this scheme, it's so intriguing to think about maybe what he can do. The negative is that you're sort of putting all your chips, if he's the guy. Again, we're kind of speaking in terms of if he's the guy and that he is the guy. You're putting all your chips basically in his basket, right? Say he goes down. Where do you go? Is there sort of a this season's over type of feel? I know we're still so far away, we probably shouldn't be talking like this, but you got to build around him, right? You got to bring in a couple of more offensive linemen. I think you got to bring in some speed guys to complement him at receiver, or else, this won't work. We've seen that before, Joey, in all levels of football, where you've got a great running quarterback, but you don't have enough around him. And I know you didn't cover that football season technically, but you saw what Mike Wright did, and you saw him take Vanderbilt to 5 wins along with a running back in Ray Davis. I think Vanderbilt looked back at this year and said, nope, scrap it. That is our year 2 for us. That's our formula. It has to be our formula. You have to have a running quarterback that gives you a chance to win. And I think that's an interesting decision. I think the staff basically said, look, that's our chance right now. And it's sort of do or die type mode. So yeah. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be really interesting. And we're going to have a guest on. I keep forgetting his name, Joey. What's his name?
Come on, Billy. Let me pull up Utah Rivals again so I can fully give him credit. Ute Nations, Alex Markham.
Alex Markham.
Pretty much every sport for Ute Nation, which is the Rivals Utah site. Friend of Chris, friend of the program as well. I want to go back to that conversation you had about the quarterbacks. I'm interested to see if they do pick someone else up. I think Johnson's their guy. Based on everything I've seen from the Vandy staff on Twitter, it seems like they believe in him as a quarterback, and they believe in him as the quarterback. And I think if you're the Vanderbilt staff and you've seen, like you said, with Mike Wright and with Ray Davis and kind of a run-heavy offense out of the backfield, it feels like that's the blueprint they're trying to replicate. And Johnson's a guy who's really gifted, and I do think has some ability as a passer and has enough ability to lead Vanderbilt at times. He was an Elite 11 guy, like I mentioned. Want to read out the Rivals eval of him at Elite 11. It said, quietly, one of the more impressive passers of the week was Johnson, who was on the money during the accuracy challenge in turn field with his ability to make accurate throws on the move and also challenge downfield. Mobility is a key element in Johnson's game, and it's an added dimension that makes him such an intriguing fit at Utah. He has a really good arm and the ability to be a dangerous dual threat option in the Pac-12. It feels like there is arm talent there, and a lot of it, Billy. I don't think he would be an Elite 11 guy. I don't think he would be a guy that Michigan was looking at out of high school if he didn't have that arm talent. I don't think he would have stuck around at Utah and started games last year if the arm talent wasn't there, and I think Vanderbilt certainly sees something there. I think Vanderbilt really likes him and likes what they have. I would think that he would be the guy. Vanderbilt already has 4 scholarship quarterbacks that had 4 last year. I think there's a lot of different skill sets in that quarterback room, which is pretty appealing to me. But I think Johnson's the guy who I look at and say, that's your day one starter, and that's the guy you're going to live and die by. And if I'm Vanderbilt, I don't know that I necessarily hate that. I think Johnson's a guy who kind of a breath of fresh air for them. And with Tim Beck especially, I think you're in a really good spot just in terms of your game plan and kind of what you can accomplish with him at quarterback. I think with Joey Lynch, it would have been a little bit different because I think he wanted a little bit of a different offensive look. But now I think Vanderbilt really has something to work with here in the quarterback room. And I'm excited if I'm a Vanderbilt fan about Johnson. It's just, can they complement him with other pieces around, and can they kind of bolster him and make things easier on him? AJ Swan was a heck of a quarterback, at least we thought, but Vanderbilt couldn't surround him, and that really hindered him and made him look probably worse than he actually is.
Yeah, I mean, Joey, this is a game-changing type get. I mean, from right away from game one in Nashville against Virginia Tech, considering he starts, you're going to see a difference maker out there. And there's a lot of excitement around the coaching staff on Twitter. You've seen players tweet about this. Gunnar Hansen, who I would guess would be his left tackle. So a lot of the players, I think Jeffrey Hugo knew him. I don't know if it was from high school ball or what, but he said, said something about the fact that they're them getting back together. So I think it's interesting because you look at him as a guy that creates some buzz and excitement, around the program, and can kind of. I'm interested to see his leadership qualities too, right? If he can really galvanize this locker room and this team, that is exactly what Vanderbilt needs. So, like we said, there are positives and negatives, both sides, right? You've seen his electric running ability, but it's going to be all in his hands pretty much, right? You're putting all the chips in the middle of the table there for Nate Johnson. And speaking of Nate Johnson, we're going to bring in a Nate Johnson expert, Alex Markham, who covers Utah from the Utah Rivals site. Alex, what's going on?
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me on. How you guys doing?
Great thing. Good. Appreciate it. I know it's late here, but we had to get you on to get your perspective on Mr. Nate Johnson, the former Utah quarterback, now announcing his commitment to Vanderbilt. And I want to start, and Joey and I will kind of fire things at you here, rapid fire, but I want to start just from your experience. He's been there for 2 years. What are the big positives you look at when you watch him play? And then maybe what are some of the negatives when you look at a guy like a Nate Johnson, when you look at maybe even his ceiling in the SEC?
I'm going to give you guys one positive, but it's also a big positive, okay? So Nate Johnson is somebody that at any given time can take a play 80 yards to the house. It's as simple as that, okay? Now, there's a few things to it, and I don't want to just empty out, everything that I know and that I've seen, because I know that you guys are going to have questions to it. But, he's fast, but he's straight line fast. Okay. There's been times where, he's made some good moves, but there were some times this year that, you question the football fast portion of it. Right. But as soon as he hits the corner, or as soon as there's a gap, he's gone. Right. So that's the positive, right? The negatives, I like Nate. Great dude. You say former Utah quarterback. Even if he stayed at Utah, he was former Utah quarterback. He wasn't going to be a quarterback next year. That's why that's one of the biggest reasons overall that he went in the portal. And then granted, he wanted an opportunity. He wanted a shot. I'll let you guys decide your opinion on if you guys feel like Utah's quarterback coach is up to snuff with developing guys, because he came from Vanderbilt, Andy Ludwig. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't going to be a quarterback next year. I mean, that was the big thing. And there's, I could break down numerous reasons why it just wasn't going to work for him. Hopefully he can tap into something at Vanderbilt, because like I said, great kid, a lot of potential. It just wasn't going to happen for him, a quarterback at Utah.
For sure. You mentioned just kind of the overall talent and the ceiling there. What do you see that leads you to believe that he could be a guy moving forward that could be a starter at Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt obviously seems to believe in him. You see the whole staff tonight basically tweeting out that this is their guy. What do you think they see in him just in terms of ability and the ceiling that he does have?
It's a good question, because, I mean, you said, what do I see in him being a starter? You didn't say starting quarterback. I see him starting at Vanderbilt at one point. I think it's going to take a position switch. I'll say this, at Utah, I don't think that he got enough of an opportunity to throw the football, but at the same time, too, he didn't give the staff enough confidence in being able to trust him with constantly throwing the football. Okay. If you guys if you guys were to talk to Adam Gorney, for instance, with Rivals, covering the national beat and everything, he saw him a lot being out in California. Um, he constantly viewed him. I kept fighting and battling, like, hey, throw him in as a QB, and dude, he's a 4-star, because of his Elite 11 results that he had. And he just says, like, look, man, he's like, no, he's like, he's a great athlete. He's like, I don't see him as quarterback, though. He's like, our national staff doesn't see him as a quarterback, though. Well, Utah staff does not see him as a quarterback. So maybe there's something there that the Vanderbilt sees that they can tap into. Their schemes a hell of a lot better than me. So again, like I want Nate to be successful. But I just, yeah, I don't know.
You said you know him well, and I kind of saw some of his interviews and tried to get a little bit of a feel for his personality. Seems like a Vanderbilt type kid, right? Seems to be well educated. Kind of a smooth talker. There has a lot of confidence. What do you? I mean, I don't know if you can really gauge this, but how do you see him as a leader, as a guy that can lead an offense and kind of, because Vanderbilt's kind of in that spot. They're coming off a 2-10 year, 0-8 in the SEC. I think we were just talking, they need a little bit of a fire lit up under them. So what I mean, do you see him as a guy that can come in and be that leader?
There's a few things to it, okay? So, and I'm not trying to rain on the parade. I've always done this. I've done this stuff for over a decade, being brutally honest, but also positive where I can be positive, right? And I like to consider myself a positive realist, basically. Nate, you could see growth in the off season where, he was starting to command the guys a lot better after practice, just how he was being with them and joking with them, but also, pumping them up and stuff like that. Nate, when he gets going and that swagger gets going, it's huge. It's contagious. Okay. But there's one big problem that, quite honestly, like, I didn't even really talk about a lot to Ute fans and stuff like that, because I just left it alone at the time. But with you guys asking that question, during the UCLA game, Utah just hung on by the skin of their teeth. It was an awful, awful offensive game, just brutal. And UCLA had a good defense, but Utah's was that much better. Utah won a defensive slugfest. Throughout that game, Nate was just sitting over there. Tell me if you guys want your quarterback saying this, okay? He's sitting over there on the bench, and the other guys on the team are having to talk him up because he's literally sitting there saying, I've lost this game for us. I'm losing this game for us. We're going to lose because of me. Okay, that is so night and day different from somebody like Cam Rising at Utah is a rare and different breed, right? Like, he's not all sunshine and rainbows, but he just has this knack of, like, even in the worst situations, everybody has the utmost confidence that, hey, guess what? We're going to pull this off. Or if we don't pull this off, we're going to give it a damn hell of a try, because we got this guy leading us. And there's not a team that we can't beat with this guy leading us, right? And then you've got Nate over there sitting there on the bench having to be talked up by everybody else. Granted, it was his first year really getting full quarterback reps in college. But when that's there, that's tough to break too. It's psychology it's a crazy and weird thing, but that is one thing I will say that Vanderbilt staff will have to work on with him when it comes to those moments. Because look, I love the Pac-12. SEC is a whole different damn breed, and the success is going to be a hell of a lot more difficult in the SEC. So if he gets it, good for him, and I'm so happy for him. I'm rooting for him, right? I would love to see what the staff can do and turn him into. One other thing, before you guys ask me anything else, kind of kicking back into, you heard his interviews. Okay. Did you listen to the one that he did on ESPN 700 where he was. Wait, no, I apologize. It was Utah's the Zone channel with KSL.
I did not.
Okay. So he had a weekly show on that he was doing for most of the season with those guys. Well, he ends up coming back after making his decision. He was talking about it, and he was like, I'm not a quitter. I'm not this. I'm not that. And then literally with like not long later, he starts talking about why he didn't show up to practice that following week, right? After his mind was pretty much made up, but he wasn't in the portal yet because there were still plenty of guys whose minds were made up, but not in the portal, And so it was weird, right? Because it's like, I'm not a quitter, I don't think Nate fully is, right? But then the answer that he gave after that's Nate, man, come on, buddy, So again, like I said the whole time, like I'm a positive realist. This is why I'm telling you guys these things this way. Again, I hope Vanderbilt has ways to be able to tap into his talent because it's there. It just wasn't going to be a quarterback at Utah.
Looking at when Johnson did get in the game, there's a few games where he attempted over 20 passes. What did the offense look like in those games? Was it a lot of screens? Was it mostly quarterback runs? How often did they let him throw it down the field? You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but could you kind of take us through what it looked like when he was in the game?
It was short, quick, intermediate. Short and intermediate passes that were quick passes. He never. I think he might have tried to throw it deep once that I can recall, and it didn't do anything. He was able to have that success against Baylor, which he won the game for him against Baylor. Him and Utah's defense, but it was because it was such a different look that Baylor was having so much success against the other quarterback. He comes in, goes in that up tempo, and catches Baylor on their heels. They couldn't do a thing about it. If Vanderbilt runs more of a up tempo system, that's going to play better into Nate's hands. But yeah, they'll. For them to be successful, it needs to be the quick passes that doesn't get him processing through everything and going from there. Because a lot of times too, like if that first one wasn't there, he was running, and there were positives with it. But again, like I said, there were plenty of times this year that he was fast but didn't show the football speed or the agility, I guess, as opposed to if he hits the corner or he has a seam, he's gone, right? He's 25 yards downfield, he's 80, he's a touchdown, right? So that is the one thing to get excited for, but does Vandy have the line to do that? So
that's another question. Alex, I got one more here for you. As a quarterback at Vanderbilt, what is the path for success? If you were to kind of say, okay, this is what it looks like. This is what success for Nate Johnson looks like at Vanderbilt as a quarterback. I know that might be a tough answer. You said he's probably a better fit, at least at Utah as a receiver, but at Vanderbilt as a quarterback, what could success look like for him? I know you talked about it there in the scheme, but what could some semblance of success look like for him from your experience watching him?
Ooh. That's a tough one, man, because like I said, I want to be positive for you guys, and there are a lot of good things, right? And at the same time, too, I don't know Vanderbilt well enough. I mean, I talk to your guy Chris all the time. I love that dude, by the way. So be good to him because he's one of my absolute favorites within the Rivals Network, and just one of my favorites. Just to we don't talk enough anymore, but just getting those random texts, random calls from him, just checking in on each other. He's such a good dude. Yeah. I was actually going back and forth with him a couple of years ago. When Utah had back-to-back years of guys dying from gunshot wounds, and knowing that Vanderbilt had kind of gone through some stuff too with their baseball program, right? I was like, dude, how do I cover this? you know, like I'm numb. Like I can't write. Like it was difficult, you know. And so talking to him, him helping me, you know, coaching me through those things. I love that dude. So
He's
I
the
know I
best.
kind of went off track on there, but
No,
I
you're good.
apologize. But yeah, I mean, semblance of success for Nate at Vanderbilt. I mean, you know, in the SEC, I know that you guys have a difficult time in the SEC, you know. Um, I mean, God, if Nate can lead you guys to 6 and 5 seasons and you know, have the offense just well balanced enough from the run and the pass aspect. You know, that's a big thing. But you guys are, unless some epiphany happens and you guys have this like crazy quarterback guru on staff, you know, you're not gonna get the same results as like Jaden Daniels jumping from the Pac-12 to the SEC. And I mean, Jaden was already a hell of a passer too, you know. So yeah, I I want to give you guys a whole bunch of positives. I do. Trust me. And I'm not trying to let your fans down. He's a great kid. Everybody's gonna love him. The swagger, when he makes a big play, the swagger just it's contagious. Everybody feeds off it, right? There were times his freshman year that every time he went into the game, everybody was like, "Oh God, here comes a touchdown." You know, it was just one of those. Magic didn't happen as much this year, you know, and a lot of it is just because, you know, when you get more reps, just kind of happens that way, right? You can't have those big boom plays constantly.
A revolving
Um,
door.
yeah. So you mentioned revolving door right there. That's one thing where both him and the other quarterback, they kind of struggled with that earlier in the year because they were rotating them quite a bit. When Nate ended up becoming the starter, that's kind of when they did away with it. Um, but then when he lost the role, they still pretty much did away with it, you know, and so it worked the other way around. Um, so that could be something just to pay attention to, that like if he's given a longer leash, maybe the psychological part of it where he's doubting himself, maybe that's not there as much. Um, yeah, man. Hey, great guy. Um, wouldn't surprise me if he was a average SEC quarterback at one point. It's not going to happen next year. But I would wager the fact that just because the mental side of things that I talk about, him not developing as a passer, um, you know, it's like you mentioned those. It's like you can't even call that a dual threat, right? Um, you know, just with those things, I would say that if he finishes at Vanderbilt, it's not going to be a quarterback.
Yeah. Hey, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see, you know, if he can take what he did at Utah and bring some of that over. But I'm glad we have somebody that's honest. I mean, I was telling Joey before, you know, if we have some guy that's just coming on and gaslighting Nate Johnson and telling Vandy fans he's going to bring Vanderbilt a playoff berth, you know, you'd be hammered by the end of the season. You know, you'd be getting
Oh,
crushed
big
by
time.
fans by the end of the
Big time.
season. But
Realistic expectations. I mean, that's what I'm giving you guys. And I mean, look, I told you guys that one thing about the UCLA game that I honestly don't recall even telling you fans, because you know, you don't want to put those things out there, and so it's like I
yeah,
almost hesitated even bringing it up to you guys. But it's a real thing. You know, you want your quarterbacks to be as unflappable as possible, because that's what everybody feeds off of. You know, the second that I heard about that in that game, that right there just told me, I was like, his long-term future at quarterback's just not there. You know,
we'll see. We'll see. Alex, appreciate it, man.
appreciate
Thanks
you
for
guys.
hopping on with us. And go give Alex a follow over there at the Utah. What do you guys? Is it what do you guys call? Is it the Ute Nation or
Yeah, it's Ute Nation
Ute Nation?
is what it is. But yeah, just follow me at a Markham Rivals, and I mean I'm always up for friendly banner. I love it, you know, and I just feed off it. You know, I don't like just sticking to the Ute crowd, even though I love those guys. But I just love good football talk.
Love it. Thanks for hopping on, Alex.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you guys for having me. Merry Christmas. And hey, again, I'd love to talk to you guys maybe when he's doing well and hitting a hot streak, and we can laugh about some of the things I was bringing up, right? But it's realistic expectations. Realistic expectations. That's what I would just tell people, just based off of the things that I gave you guys.
Appreciate the honesty. That's Joey Dwyer. That's Alex Markham from the Utah site hopping on with us. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it, man.
No problem.
Appreciate